America and the Caribbean, and HUSU Human Policy Volunteer Leader, member of the Mercy for Animals Detroit Hub, and the United Nations Harmony with Nature expert. And she's a foster mentor with the Capital Area Humane Society and specializes in neonatal orphan kittens. Professor David Favre, instead, has been a professor of law in Michigan State University, College of Law, for over 44 years, serving as dean of the college for 5 years and teaching the area of property law, animal law, international environmental law. Professor Favre has written a number of articles and books dealing with animals issues, including such topics as animal cruelty, wildlife law, animal rights, ethics of animal use, and international control of animal trade. His book include the case book Animal Law, Welfare, Interest and Right, the ethics book Respecting Animals, a legal roadmap, the future of animal law, and he introduced the concept of living property through a number of law review articles. He has organized international conferences on animal law and has presented to international audiences. He created is editor-in-chief of the largest animal legal web resource in the world, Animal Law Info, and now residing in the farm in Lower, Michigan. Professor Favre shares space with sheep, chickens, and usual assortment of dogs and cats. And he was founding officer of the Animal Legal Defense Fund for 22 years, serving as president of the board of the last 2 years. And these are, let me tell you, these are really remarkable CVs. So I'm very, very happy to be here to listen to these scholars. And the topic they choose, I read the resume, has to deal with some aspects that are very dear to me when it comes to animal experiment. They are very dear to the European countries, which is transparency in animal research, communication, and protection of animals, and actually the way to, in some way, recognize when animals are mistreated and not treated properly in animal research, and how we can prevent, recognize, and intervene to correct this situation. So I'm very happy, and the focus I can see is about how United States, with their big weight they have of animal experiment, can in some way not lead the way, but show ways in which we can prevent this situation. And I'll be very interested to confront with the European situation. So I give you the stage to Angie or Professor Favre. I don't know who's the first, and I'll shut up.
I think Angie's going to start us.
Yes, we can share our presentation, right? Just give me 1 second, because I don't. So here, no, that's not it. Okay, so how can I? Oh, here it is. Okay, can you see the presentation?
Not yet.
There we go.
Okay.
All right, so thank you so much for that introduction. My name is Angie Vega.
Angie, sorry, can you put it on the presentation mode? Perhaps it's better.
It's not
so we can see the entire screen.
No.
Yeah.
There we go.
Right, perfect.
Perfect. Okay. Good. Thank you. So my name is Angie Vega, and can you hear me? And you have to mute it. You have to mute it.
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank Dobbs and the whole team for organizing this event and for facilitating the spaces to talk about important topics surrounding animals. And we're going to talk about a very difficult topic today. It is animals used in science. We currently have millions of animals that are being experimented on all over the world. And whereas science might still transition to a non-animal research, we still have the situation where we have millions of animals trapped in the system, and we need to provide or think about ways that to improve their lives, right? I think a lot of us here are lawyers, so when we think about ways to improve the life of animals, we're thinking about legislative reform, right? Which ultimately would be the best solution. However, We would have to go country by country, and this would take a lot of time. There is a situation in which we could improve the life of animals that are currently trapped in the legal system based on the influence that the United States have on this field, right? And that's what we're going to talk about today. We are going to have to talk about how the NIH, which is the National Institutes of Health of the United States, work, and a little bit of US legislation so we can understand the issue, the discrepancies, and what we could potentially do to improve the situation, right? I hope you enjoy this presentation. I hope you are inspired by this topic. And now I will hand it over to Professor David Favre.
Second slide. Okay, we have a number of issues we want to talk about, obviously. And the first will be, to what degree do we want to talk about ethics? And that is a very difficult topic. I don't want to consume a whole lot of our presentation right now with ethics, but we'd be happy to talk about it after the presentation. I happen to have a undergraduate degree in chemistry and have been part of the scientific world for my adult life. And therefore, I think I have a little more sense of what is science than a lot of people might have. And of course, most science has nothing to do with animals. It has to do with the physical world. It has to do with astronomy, physics, all these other things. But obviously, with my career path, I have come to focus on animals and bring up the debate about the use of live animals in research. One of the things to clarify fairly quickly, though, is that here we are talking about science. We're not talking about testing of commercial products. That's a different balancing of ethical questions. And a number of countries around the world have already outlawed the sale of products that have been tested in the area of cosmetics. And but that's a very small part of the world. Here we want to talk about science. Well, what is science? Science is engaging in experimentation, either thought or physical experimentation, to gain new knowledge about the world around us, how things actually work. And obviously, being biological entities, we are really complex, and there's a lot of things to talk about, and animals have been looked at for models of what is life and what are the pieces of life and how do things go together. There are among us here in this audience, I suspect, a number of people who think there should be no animals in science at all, and that's something we can talk about later. What is clear is that science has the capacity to use animals under the law of the United States, and I believe just about every other country in the world, because the decision has been made that the gathering of that information is more important than the pain and suffering and death of the animals or in the experiments. So I think what we want to do as a primary focus here is talk about what about the animals in experimentation? How do we minimize the pain and suffering and death of those animals? And to what degree does a law seek to pursue us that way? We might in the future have something to talk about with artificial intelligence and that replacing live animal experiments, but we'll leave that possibility later. Now we want to talk about, our focal point will be the possibility of how our funding mechanism in the United States is shaping the use of animals on a global basis. And that's the role of the National Institutes of Health. So this is, again, the ethical perspective, which we in the animal movement, of course, want to have considerable focus upon. And as I will explain in just a bit, the laws in the United States do acknowledge the presence of pain, suffering, and death, and do seek to minimize it, but not outlaw it is the problem. The other thing to sort of keep in mind as we proceed is the laws of the United States are limited to, obviously, the territory of the United States. However, our institution, the NIH, grants money on a global basis. And this causes a disconnect because where a lot of our money goes is not bound by US law, only by the contract that exists between the NIH and the other organization receiving the money. Okay.
Okay, now we move on to more questions, paper question about regarding animal research. So we wonder how many animals are used in research currently, right? You have to mute yourself. Oh, okay, let's start over. So now we're gonna go into the topic of the use of animals in scientific research, right? So we know now that there is some legislation in the US that almost every country, I assume, have some level of laws regulating the topic, but we wonder how many animals are used in research, right? There is really no way of knowing how many animals are used in laboratories for purposes of advancing science. I can tell you this is because the majority of legislations do not require research facilities and breeders to keep tabs, keep numbers of how many animals they're reproducing and testing on. In the US, for example, there is a legislation, which is the Animal Welfare Act, that regulates what they call Class A dealers, which are the facilities that breed, sell, and purchase animals, and they're required to have a license and report how many animals they are breeding and experimenting on. Given that under the statute, only animals that are warm-blooded animals are protected under the regulations, leaving out that 95% of animals that are actually used in the scientific field, which is mice and rats are purposely bred, and mice, rats, and birds are purposely bred, and cold-blooded animals. So all these animals, we don't have any records of how many animals are bred, how many rats, how many birds, how many mice, just because it is not legally required, right? The same case is for Colombia, where they don't have that requirement for these facilities to keep these numbers neither. So I can tell you now that there is a large array of species that are experimented on. They can go from dog, cats, pigs, cows, fishes, octopuses, frogs, and they are all purposely bred in research facilities and usually genetically modified to fit certain traits for purposes of scientific projects, right? One of the reasons why they're bred in captivity is because they need many of these animals to fulfill the demand, but also because scientists need animals that are pathogen-free, that are healthy, so they can conduct research that is leading to, that leads to reliable data, right? So the protection of these animals is usually contingent on the development of national legislations where these animals are bred, and also other instances such as, for example, whether the animals are going to be imported or exported, and so on. We also have another situation where wild animals can be captured to be used for scientific research if the conditions allowed. And there are two different situations. There are many different regulations. Again, this depends on whether state or even federal regulations on the species, the permits that are required by the state agency, whether the species is an endangered species, treaties of which the country where the animals are from are a party to, and factors like this ones, right? So for the case of animals in the US, or specifically Michigan, for example, It is the Department of Natural Resources that is in charge of issuing these licenses to conduct research on wild-caught animals. In Colombia, they have specific agencies as well that are in specific regions where the animals are located, and they're in charge of issuing permits of breeding, capturing, and scientific research. And this varies all over the world. But there are two circumstances. So some of you might notice that the US doesn't have any native species. So traditionally, the US has had to import primates from other countries in order to be able to conduct research. There are reports that they can use up to 70,000 primates in a year. And there is also another circumstance of where the experimentation, the research project is going to take place in the jurisdiction where the monkeys are from. Now, there's a unique circumstance that we're going to talk about after this first slide that is regarding the supply chain of monkeys, the global supply chains of monkeys and its current state.
And as Angie suggested, we don't have any primates native to the United States. And so any brought in have to come from other countries. The major species used for scientific research are macaques, and they are located in East Asian areas, as suggested in map number 1 on the slide. Various countries have various macaques and other smaller monkeys. We might note that chimpanzees are not imported to the United States at this point in time. So it is the smaller primates that, like macaques, that want to come in. What happens is that there are either breeding stations or captive wildlife members that get together and are brought together by bunchers, is one term used, who bring together wild-caught animals for export. And then they find a way out. Historically, it was China was the place where the animals were put on an airplane to be shipped somewhere. But just recently, a couple of years ago with COVID, China decided no longer to export primates. I think that doesn't mean that they aren't arriving in China. It means China is using all the primates that come into the country. But there are still travel routes that might be taken by air from Indonesia area to come to the United States through the large animal suppliers that we have here in the United States. A weak point in this chain is the fact that they have to be flown in to make any sense of this process, and that no U.S. carrier is willing to bring in live primates right now. Air France is the last of the larger airlines to say they are not going to bring in primates. So there's now a bottleneck in how they actually transport the animals from Southeast Asia into the United States. So much so that there is now an effort to try and breed primates here in the United States, and therefore have to bypass this entire thing. That may or may not happen, but it's something that's being talked about. Okay, I'd like to now give you just the legal frameworks that govern what happens to animals used in science. That we have one thing to talk about at the international level, and that's the Treaty CITES, which is Convention on Threatened and Endangered Species. All primates are listed on one of the 2 appendices that are there. The great apes are all on Appendix 1, and Appendix 1 says that there can be no commercial shipment of primates, of Appendix 1 species, which is the great ape. So chimpanzees cannot be shipped around the world for the purpose of scientific experiment. There are no gorillas used in this area at all, so that's not a problem. But a number of the other primates are in Appendix 2, which requires that permits be given by the country of export to show that it's not going to harm the species. CITES has nothing to say about science. It is entirely focused on preserving species at a healthy level within the country of origin. And so if you take out too many primates, you actually will reduce the population and put the species in endangerment. So that is the responsibility of the exporting country to make sure that does not happen. However, we know that a number of the countries in Southeast Asia have real troubles with enforcing those laws within their countries. Now, the other act, another act within the US is the Animal Welfare Act. And this act deals with animals in a wide assortment of areas, specifically including zoos and specifically including scientific research facilities. So they are meant to be covered by this Animal Welfare Act. It is limited in scope by the definition of animal, such that rats, mice, and birds are not covered, but the other animals are. This law was first passed back in the 1960s and has been amended every 5 or 6 years thereafter, but it has some old views of animals and our obligations to them. A number of us would say this law is really outdated to do the best it can for animals. It has requirements that have to be met by all scientific facilities, but it mostly is food, water, temperature, physical things. And there's simply no requirement for socialization or for the mental well-being of animals being held in research. So it's sort of a really base amount of requirements that are there. Now, for research facilities specifically, they do have requirements that require the least amount of pain and suffering, the least number of animals to be used possible, and still allow the science to happen. And it leaves the decision of what animal experiment should proceed to a committee within the institution where the animals are located. So here at Michigan State University, there is an animal care committee that looks into all proposed animal experiments. And that committee decides, not the government, the local committee decides whether or not the experiment should proceed with that species and with that number of animals. So we have, by federal law, we have a delegation of obligation to consider a number of issues about animals, as well as requirements of the use of analgesics and pain relief during experimentation wherever possible. The other one we have is NIH, but before we go to that, I'm wondering if our colleague there from Italy might be able to tell us just a little bit about their Animal Welfare Act in Italy.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, can you see me and hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I was listening with great interest. Just one question I want to know. When Angie was talking about not knowing how many animals are in the labs, you were referring to United States, to Latin America, or?
Well,
We're talking about the amount of animals that are bred to be used in science. There are no statistics available because in a lot of countries, these statistics are not required.
Okay.
So,
In Europe is required by law. We know exactly how many animals are used, in which country, with what usage, with level of invasiveness. In terms of primates, I can tell you that the last data, completed data we have is for the year 2020. And in the member states of Europe, including Norway, but excluding Great Britain, we used about 7,000 primates. In Italy, we use about 400 primates. Now, the use of primates, there are a few things. It's not allowed in Europe to do any experimentation in gray apes, and it's forbidden to import animals who are caught wild. Although there is a worries by the European Commission that some animals that are declared to be bred on site are actually captured wild. This is a big concern about the European Commission. They can't check for that. The other thing is that Italy has the strange thing that we cannot breed animals, primates for research, which to me is a huge mistake, because that means that you have to import animals from other countries, and that means very detrimental for their welfare. Instead of animals bred in your lab, animals get used to people, get used to procedure, get used to where they are, they can be kept in group and everything. The animal experiments, but we don't call experiments anymore. We got the procedure of using animals in scientific inquiry is regulated in Europe by a directive that was issued in 2010, the number 63, and is, in my opinion, is an excellent law. It sets minimal standards. It set minimal standards because you have to agree, all different countries have to agree. And so at some point it cannot be so specific because that means that some country would be left out. So it set minimal standard. There are some areas in which different countries can have freedom to do things in relation to their cultural, scientific, and economical identity. In terms of Italy, we applied, we adopted this directive in 2014 with the Italian legislative decree number 26 from 2014, which translate the European directive. Primates have a special position in the legislation because there are certain articles who are dedicated as to primates, and they have a special condition if you want to use primates in research, which is, for example, I can give you a few things. For any research, you use primate, you have to do what is called the retrospective assessment. The Ministry of Health, which is in charge of animal experimentation in Italy, will ask the researcher to tell what have you been doing in your research, have you reached your findings, what have you published, how were animals were treated, the prediction of the level of invasiveness you declare at the beginning of when you apply for research was respected or was less, was more, something like that. The other thing that for primate research is absolutely obligatory to have inspection by the ministry. And in Italy, it's quite easy because there are a few groups that use primates. I can tell you for 400 primates we use, I can tell you 370 could be used for regulatory studies, and that means 2-3 big centers in Italy. The rest goes for behavior and neuroscience. The group using macaques in neuroscience in Italy are 5, I think, 5. So it's easier to keep track of it. The number of animals used in Europe can be consulted by everybody because there is a website called Allure, which give all the numbers of experimentation. You can dig there and find. They tell me it's pretty complicated to navigate on this website, by the way. And a friend of mine, a colleague of mine said, it's so, in terms of transparency, it's so transparent that you can't see anything. But anyway, the information is there. A general comment I want to make about all this, because I acknowledge and I understand, I appreciate the fact that your emphasis is very much on law and regulation. I think the law and regulation are fine. We can have stricter regulation. We can have regulation which are that can be effective in protecting the animals in experiments. But I think what is really needed is beyond law, is a cultural change, is a new attitude of the scientific community toward animals in experiments. This is what is needed, because the law we have in Europe, in my opinion, is one of the best in the world. It's not the best in the world, but give minimal standards. If you follow the law in a primate lab and use macaques, you can be within the law, but the animals can still have a pretty miserable quality of life. And every time I saw real improvement is when researchers went beyond the law, beyond what is the basic background, minimal standard the law gives. It means a new perspective, a new way of looking at animals, a new way of thinking about animals, and that can bring a change.
Okay, just as I note, I completely agree with what you just said. We acknowledge we are experiencing a transition towards non-animal use, but it's going to take time, right? That's not going to happen overnight. So that's what we need to look at options to improve the lives of the animals that are trapped in the system.
Absolutely agree.
When I was saying they're not statistics about how many animals are bred for research, there are some estimates the experts have made. And they have calculated that in the US, for example, there are 50 million animals being used annually in the US alone. Now that
50
number,
million.
and that is just an estimation. We don't have a way of knowing exactly how numbers are
In
there.
Europe is 8.8 at the moment. And
Yeah,
well,
I believe that.
2020, 8.8.
Because then when we look at the worldwide, the numbers worldwide, it goes to 115 million. So the US is conducting research on animals at a larger scale, probably than most of the world. And they have the National Institutes of Health, and we're gonna start looking a little deeper into the issue that we want to discuss here. The National Institutes of Health is the agency, is the federal agency that has 27 institutes that specialize on different diseases and body systems. And we are just going to focus specifically on the regulations that the NIH has with respect to the use of animals in foreign research, because that is the topic that we chose for our ongoing research right now. But they have, so they have the 27 institutes, and they have a system in place, right? That shows that they care about the animals, at least on paper, where they state that they are committed to the research, to the well-being, and to providing the best care to animals used in research. And how do they do that? They have a PHS policy, that's a Public Health Service Humane Policy on Animal Care and Use, and that is a document. It is the document that institutions have to abide by in order to ensure continued funding from the NIH, right? They have an office, a specific office that's called the Office of Laboratory Animal Welfare. And its purpose is to oversee compliance with that policy and to train the public and the facilities on how to use that policy to ensure the welfare of animals. And they also have what they require as what's called welfare assurances, which is a document that each facility has to provide before funding is given to them, where they are committed, they're promising to comply with the policy and with other requirements. Now, in a little bit, we're going to talk about why or how these assurances look different depending on where the foreign facility is coming from, right? So we have different requirements if the facility is from the US. We have different requirements if the facility is in a different country but is conducting research for a US facility. And we have different requirements if the facility that is located in a different country is directly receiving funds from the NIH. So I think one important point about the NIH is that they are the main financial supportive of biomedical research in the world. And when I say in the world, it is beyond the US borders. They dedicate, in 2020, they dedicated $2.4 billion to research outside of the US. And then between the time frame of 2011 to 2021, we're talking about $318 billion. So we can see that they have a huge influence in the way the laboratories conduct research on animals, and we are thinking that we should hold them accountable, and they should use that leverage to improve the life of animals that are currently in the system.
The NIH provides, as suggested over the past 10 years, has provided $2.2 billion for animal research, both in the United States, outside the United States, $2 billion outside the United States. They are clearly a major, except perhaps for Europe itself, a major funder of research. But they do it two different ways. One is directly with an institution outside the United States. They have a contractual relationship with them to engage in a particular experiment. But secondarily, they give a grant to, say, a university here in the United States, and this university then has a secondary contract with a facility outside the United States. When COVID struck and a lot of questions came up about Wuhan University and what relationship we might have had with Wuhan University, there was some research done, and it was found out that the United States NIH was funding Wuhan to the extent of $200,000 directly for certain research, but that another $2 million was spent at Wuhan of US money through 5 other US-based organizations. So the university where people think COVID might have come from, in fact, was receiving considerable amount of money from our grant-giving institutions here in the United States. Now, this raises the question of, well, what are the conditions that animals have to meet when they're outside the US boundaries? And this is where we get to some difficult issues, because the system in the US seems to be based upon trust of self-reporting, and it's not at all clear that that's going to happen in other countries.
Okay, so now we have a little chart here so you can, to illustrate to you how the different requirements come into play depending where the research facility is. So it gives you a better visual of how things work and whether it is easier for foreign facilities to misrepresent information and continue to receive funding disregarding the treatment that they give to the animals that they use, right? So we know that as the US, the facilities that are within their jurisdiction have to comply with the Animal Welfare Act. We already talked about the Animal Welfare Act, and the USDA, who is the authority that regulates and enforces the Animal Welfare Act. And they also have to agree to comply with what's called the PHS policy, which we just talked about as well, on the humane care and treatment of animals. Now, every single facility is obligated to establish what's called IUCs, which is the institutional care committees at the institutional level, right? And they're also subject to agency oversight. So that is the US to make sure that they're complying with the Animal Welfare Act, and also OLAP, that to make sure they're complying with the PH policy. Now we move on to what happened overseas, and it looks a little different, right? As a side note, all of them, as I mentioned previously, have to have a welfare assurance document where they have to lay out how they're going to perform research on animals, right? But that looks different if the facility is in the US. So if we look at the last column, they're not required to have institutional animal care committees. They just have to certify that they're in compliance with domestic laws and with the PH policy, right? An issue with this system that is set out is the oversight of the NIHA, right? So now we know that the NIHA is giving money to foreign facilities all over the world, hefty sums of money. So now we wonder, how are they enforcing their requirements? Well, we have a situation here where, as Professor Favre just mentioned, their relationship with the recipients is based on trust. And it is trust that they will comply with the PH policy and with domestic laws, trust that they will self-report any serious non-compliance with these requirements. So in reality, the NIHA is not conducting any site visits, and it's not conducting any audits, which are very valuable and important in order to assess how animals are being treated, right? It's not the same to have a document stating that the animals are taken care of, that as having an official go to conduct a research facility to assess whether there is appropriate ventilation, heating, or air conditioning system, whether the animals are being provided with physical and emotional enrichment, whether they have an appropriate diet, and so on, right? So their oversight is basically limited to the review of annual reports that the facilities submit every year, and to the evaluation of non-compliance instances that can be self-reported or that are reported by whistleblowers or third parties, which is also very difficult because we already know the way animals are treated is usually kept behind the closed doors of the facility. So unless there is somebody that has access to these places, it's very difficult to learn how animals are being treated. So again, Olaf has stated that they have an obligation to provide to ensure that animals are being cared for while they're being used in research. But here we're seeing a system where facilities have a very easy, let's call it like that. It's very easy for them to misrepresent information in order to obtain continued funding. And it is very hard for us to find out whether animals are being treated. And for that reason, I mean, it's fairly fair. It's fair to assume that animals that are all over the world that where the laws might not be as strong as it sounds like they are in Italy, are being subjected to horrible mistreatment and in pursuit of science, and nobody is checking on this facilities that are receiving funding from the US. Okay.
It's a question to which there's an obvious answer, and that is no. Domestic law is not enough. US law, in this case, operating in Colombia, it actually doesn't operate in Colombia, and that's a major issue. Even though, as we'll see, Colombia law is on paper is a relatively well done piece of legislation dealing with animals and science. But the question is, in many countries who don't have the same level of resources for administration of laws that we do in the United States, is there somebody inspecting? Is there somebody talking to? Does anybody actually go look at the facility? So that domestic law might actually work in a foreign country, because it clearly doesn't work here. Other things that might come up in domestic law in other countries is where did the animals come from? How are they being held? Do they have veterinary care? And what is ultimately is the ultimate use of the animal. So I think now we'd like to turn to provide you with a little bit more detail about what happened when PETA did an investigation of a particular lab down in the country of Colombia, and what the fallout from that investigation was. Angie?
Okay, so we're going to talk about our case of a study which took place in Colombia in 2023. This is a very complex issue, so I invite everybody to go on our website or the PETA's website to follow up what's happening with this case. Since it is so complex, I just divided it by 3 phases. I'm going to explain very quickly, this is not it, to you what animals are, what is the legal framework in Colombia, right? So we have a country in Latin America that has an animal welfare law that recognizes animals as sentient beings. It has a specific term, and by no means I'm saying the Colombian legal framework is adequate. As a matter of fact, I think it is updated, it is unimplemented and unenforced. I just wanted to show you the perspective from a neutral person that doesn't know the intricacies of a law and that does not necessarily look for how to improve the life of animals. but they have, as I just mentioned, a welfare law, an anti-cruelty law where animals are considered sentient beings, not just on this law, but also in the civil code and the criminal code. They have a chapter, which is only like 2 or 3 articles, that is dedicated to laboratory animals. They also have designated authorities to issue and oversee compliance with permits regarding the use of laboratory animals, their capture and their breeding. They require prior authorization of the Ministry of Health and Social Protection, right? Then we have this research facility, and on paper, this looks like this. Caucaseco is a consortium that's made up of 5 different institutes that are working in collaboration to develop science, and their primary focus is to develop a malaria research vaccine. This consortium has been able to secure funding from the US, from Colombia, from other institutions in Europe. They have co-authored scientific papers and they have published papers with the most prestigious universities in the world, including Harvard, including Emory. They have continued funding since 2003, so it's been 20 years of the NIH funding their research. And they state that they take care of homeless monkeys, that they provide them with the best care possible, right? Now, I want to just state 2 very important instances in this case, which was a citizen complaint that took place in 2020 and a PETA report. And I highly recommend that you read that report because the level of detail is impressive. And this report was sent not just to the Colombian authorities, but to the US authorities as well. Before that PETA report went out, the Colombian authorities were fairly quiet. They conducted 1 inspection, 1 site visit that revealed very concerning issues, but they didn't do more beyond that. But starting by the day where the authorities received these letters, this is all that has been happening. And we can't go through all of it, so that's why I encourage you to go on this page and see, because it's amazing everything that was able to be accomplished thanks to the work that PETA did. So they sent these letters at the end of 2022. By January 1st, we have several authorities on the case announcing different investigations. We have the environmental authorities. We also started a criminal investigation for animal cruelty, never seen before in animal research. We have the Comptroller's Office conducting audits, and so on. Many other authorities intervened to find out what was going on with these facilities. To summarize the case, the Colombian environmental authorities found that the monkeys were kept in horrible conditions, and within 3 months, they had already confiscated them. Let me look, I can show you some photos that were obtained from the investigation and from PETA's whistleblower. So this is the day they confiscated the monkeys. This is where the monkeys were kept in. So it was a facility that did not have any ventilation.
We don't see it, Angie. We don't see it.
You don't? I don't know how to do it.
No, we do.
Oh, okay. It might not work, and I wanted to show you this. So
Probably we don't want to see it.
yeah, it's upsetting. But
Describe the picture.
okay, so we have pictures showing where the monkeys were kept. This was it was like a fabric enclosure. I don't know how to describe it, where there was not ventilation. There were several cages is close to each other, rusty soil covering feces. Animals were missing, they had skin lesions, they were missing teeth, they were missing eyes, they were kept either alone or in very crowded spaces and very small cages. They did not have any, other findings included, they did not feed, these are nocturnal monkeys. They belong to the Eotus species. It's two different species. They're nocturnal. They were fed during the day. They did not have any records on the veterinary care that they were receiving. They did not have any records of the ethics committees meetings. Everything that could go wrong with animals was happening inside this facility. So then my question is, how does the NHA come into this picture, right? As I just saw you, they were funding this research for 20 years, even though the research facility did not have any permits since 2013. So for 10 years, they didn't have their required permits to research on the animals. They didn't, they were breeding monkeys, even though they weren't allowed to. And they didn't have any ethics committees. They were just a lot of different findings that's terrifying, and it's very upsetting to read how things can get so bad in a country that seemingly have a legal framework that can at least provide the minimum protections for animals, right? So we have Calcaseco, didn't comply with domestic laws, didn't comply with PHS policies, didn't comply with any international guidelines for the humane care of animals, and they still receive money from the NHA. So, would you say that the US has responsibility in the way that this happened? I would say yes. I think the US and the Colombian government failed these monkeys, and they had to endure horrible treatment for a very long time, for over a decade, in order to develop a malaria research that didn't even happen because they didn't find anything, right? So this is another reason why the NHA cannot rely on this trust relationship, because even if there is on paper legislation or legal framework that seems not great, but okay, we never know how a given country is going to apply their laws. So the NHA can't just wash their hands and say that this is the responsibility of countries and that they trust their recipients. They need to do more. I wish I could show you the pictures. I can send you the link through this chat. This is a very upsetting case, but it shows to illustrate the actual issue and how big it is and how it affects not just the US, but it has an impact all over. And we don't know how many animals or how many facilities are mistreating animals because facilities that are being funded by the NHA, because they don't conduct any oversight. They don't take accountability on the amount of money that they have, and that they are supposedly to be committed to take care of the animals, right? A lot of good things happen as a result of this case, thanks to PETA. We have the Colombian government, a lot of authorities came together to investigate this issue. We have environmental sanctioning procedure that ended up finding responsible the owners of the research facility and find them for, I believe it was $280,000, and they're not allowed to be given permits anymore. We have the very first time a research facility is being investigated criminally for animal mistreatment in the country. We also have, this also took the US, there is a bill that was introduced in Congress last year to prohibit the funding of US government to foreign facilities. So that is also a good outcome of this terrible case. And the monkeys were confiscated, and they're outside of the hands of these people, and they're never going back to being researched on. They are in a rehabilitation facility. I don't know what's their status right now. The experts found a lot of terrifying health conditions with them, in addition to what the environmentalists had already found. So yeah, so that is what we wanted to talk today, to tell you about today, and explain this issue, and give you an example of how that system doesn't work and how we can make it work to improve the lives of animals that are currently being used in research. And I don't know how to go back to, sorry. How can I get here? So I don't know if you want to.
Okay, we've sort of come to the end of our presentation here, and we just want to point out the difficulties within the United States when it comes to animal research outside the United States in particular. And we would urge that NIH not engage in that funding until a new system can be put into place, which requires visitations. There's no substitute for having an inspector walk into a building and see what's there. I think anybody from the US who walked into where these animals were being held would question the science itself, let alone the conditions of the animals. So we need to have much more accountability for money that is taken outside the US. Angie, anything else?
Yeah, so here are our conclusions. Am I muted now? The NIH and the US, the US have a big responsibility when it comes to the use of animals in science, and they should use that impact and that leverage they have to protect their lives. They have a very privileged position where they can ensure at least a more ethical treatment of animals, and they have failed their own commitment to ensure animal welfare because of their lax and lenient policy. I want to highlight the PETA's case. This was an amazing case that underscores how important effective animal advocacy is, where legal expertise and activism come together to raise awareness, enact legal reform, and improve the lives of countless mistreated animals, right? And this presentation, we hope you've liked it. It is the preamble of ongoing research that we've been working on. And if you are interested in knowing how the NIH can ensure the ethical treatment of animals used in science, you're gonna have to read our upcoming paper because we suggest an answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so very extremely interesting. I wonder, Marita, if we can probably ask for, we got 20 minutes, 25, ask for questions, comments, or from the people who are around.
I want to make one more comment before we open it up for questions. This kitty that you see here, so most of our pictures are taken from We Animal Media. This kitty's name is Yogi, and he was used in starvation research for 8 years. He was rescued, and he's happily living at a home now. So I know a lot of people like this story, so I just wanted to bring it up.
Okay, so anybody want to talk or want to ask questions or comments or? Can't hear you, Marita. Marita, can't hear you.
We have today 25 guests in our clinic. Between them, Tagore Trajano, who I welcome. Tagore, thank you for coming and for joining us to this highly interesting talk. So you know, Augusto, that at the beginning it is difficult. So to start asking, maybe so you can maybe resume or suggest some areas of interest of about the presentation of our speakers. Thank you very much to you both, David and Angie, for the high interesting so future paper you have us so given the first
There's someone
presentation.
who wants to ask things. Yeah.
Okay, Francisca.
Francisca. Yeah.
Hola, buenas tardes. Lo siento por el ruido de fondo, por el café y claro, me preguntaba en español, así que no sé si se puede hacer o no.
En español y do you understand Augusto Spanish enough for translating?
No,
then I will translate.
not even enough. Nothing. Not even enough.
Okay,
Zero.
then I'll translate the
Sorry.
question. Okay, Francisca, forward.
Disculpen si es que esto ya lo hablaron porque me uní hace poco, pero quería saber cómo va avanzando las reformas de la FDA. Entiendo que se presentó hace poco una tercera reforma para presentar pruebas que no hayan sido realizadas en animales, pero hay una gran discusión respecto a su implementación. Y lo mismo con las normativas respecto a la adopción de animales utilizados en laboratorios. ¿Cómo ha sido en Estados Unidos? ¿Cómo se ha avanzado en el tema? ¿Si ha habido algún rechazo por parte de la industria quizás o de los científicos? ¿O ha sido una normativa que ha sido aceptada de forma transversal? Eso, muchas gracias.
Oh, Angie, I forgot that you speak Spanish. Please, you can answer. So,
So I don't, can you repeat the second question? ¿Puedes repetir la segunda pregunta?
Sí, es que por lo menos en Estados Unidos, revisando la normativa, he visto que se han propuesto varias normas que los animales utilizados en laboratorios sean luego dados en adopción a refugios o que simplemente avanzan en esa línea. ¿Cómo ha sido esa normativa? ¿Si ha sido aceptada por los laboratorios, por ejemplo, por los científicos, o ha habido un rechazo? Por lo menos acá, yo soy de Chile, trabajo en una organización que ve todo el tema de avanzar en la provisión de testeo de productos cosméticos en animales, y claro, por lo menos acá no se experimenta tanto en animales como en Estados Unidos. Entonces claro, esta normativa quizás es difícil de implementarla acá, pero ¿cómo ha sido en Estados Unidos su aceptación y su implementación?
Okay, I'm going to try to translate. So the first question was about implementation and amendment to the FDA guidelines. I don't know if Professor Favre knows anything about that, so I don't know either. The second question was about, and I believe you meant state legislations to adopt out animals after they're done being researched on. So that's something that has been happening. I can say now what I know about it, it depends on the state. There are states, is it Idaho, that completely prohibits that animals are taken, are adopted out after their research done, but there's an increasing number of states approving or passing laws allowing or requiring animals to be adopted out after the facilities are done researching on them. Oh, lo dije en español. Do you have anything to say?
It's required by law in Europe to adopt animal. I mean, to give. Okay, animals are not being sacrificed, eliminated for research means. They need to be adopted or put in sanctuaries. That goes for mice, rats, anything. It's required by law. There's an article by law saying that.
okay.
And should I try to translate really quick? lo traduzco, Marita.
Sí, por favor, si es tan
Bueno,
amable.
acerca del FDA no sabemos nada. Esa es una de las instituciones de las que es parte los NHA, sobre esa separate, es una institución diferente, sin embargo, tiene mucho que ver en el impacto que los animales tienen en cuanto a la utilización científica. En cuanto a la segunda pregunta, tenemos que eso varía dependiendo del estado. Hay 2 o 3 estados que prohíben que se adopten los animales, pero hay un número de estados que están implementando la obligación de que se adopten los animales una vez estas instituciones han terminado de realizar experimentación con ellos.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Francisca. Ujú. Yolanda. A ver.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. This was amazing, an amazing presentation, and I am so glad that I came today because I was almost I was in a meeting before. So I just want to ask you, at some point you said that what it is needed is a cultural change, which is the most important part of this conversation. But how do you balance, how do you harmonize the legal changes that we need with the cultural changes? Because we as attorney, what we can, in Puerto Rico, we try to ban the experimentation of vivisection, but the law was amended afterwards. But how we as attorneys can harmonize that changes, the legal changes with the cultural changes? What we can do to do that at the same time, because we cannot do legal changes without taking into account the cultural changes. So what are your suggestions to try to change not only in the legal field but also in the cultural aspects?
I think I might have some thoughts for you. We have an amazing example here in the United States of how cultural change impacted chimpanzee research without any change of law. Starting around 2002, a number of organizations were making chimpanzees a focal point of concern, and it's fairly easy to engage the public with talking about chimpanzees or dogs and cats. But they never proposed a law that changed the Animal Welfare Act to prohibit it, as it apparently has happened within the EU. Instead, what happened was the primate researchers themselves ultimately came together and decided that they would not engage in any further primate research, and instead seek to have those that were held by institutions to be put into sanctuaries. So the scientists, there's two groups that we need the cultural change. One is in broad society, and the second is within the researchers themselves. As you try to change the broader society, I think there is a feedback over to the scientists themselves. They're not entirely isolated. They do hear what's happening around them, and they're capable of making changes. The way it works in the United States with the institutional committees, we have no way of knowing what changes have happened within those committees that make it better for animals or prohibit certain kinds of experiments, et cetera, et cetera. It is indeed within the culture of the scientist that is deciding ultimately what happens and doesn't. But it's still part of, this is not a place for lawsuits, I don't think, but it is a place for broad cultural awareness, hopefully then feeding back into the world of science.
Can I say something? I totally agree. I totally agree with what Professor Fram said. I would be less optimistic for my experience and what I see in my country, for example, about scientists listening so much to what the people have to say about their concern about animals. I would be more let's say, more effective in trying to change the heads of the people doing research. The reason why scientists are less inclined to listen to the public as they should do is because for many, many years, I'm talking about Italy, the scientific community has been secretive about what we're doing. And then it has been a huge gap between the scientific community and the general public. So what it is, that did inspire a series of suspicion about the public opinion on what was going on in the labs. And in the past, that was a genuine suspicion, because in the past things were really bad, things now have improved. But this lack of transparency created a sort of gap between public and scientific community has to be filled. Now the scientific community is running after the possibility to talk with the general public, but they don't know how to, we don't know how to do it yet, because we still have the model of having the big mouth and small ears. Instead, we have to small mouth and big ears and listen to the concern. On the other hand, what happened is this, that because there was this gap, the more extreme animalist fringe of the animalist movement, which I consider to be a sort of a rainbow of different positions, have been attacking very much the scientific community, and that has created again the fact that the community closed itself. So there's a lot of damage has been done from different sides that have to be mended when we try to do as best as we can. The two things are, scientists need to learn how to better communicate with public about what they're doing, how they're doing it, and take the responsibility of what they're doing and justify what they're doing. And the scientific community has to change the ways they're doing experiments. In Europe, we have a law. Part of the law require for every single person who have to touch an animal to have a sort of a license, let's say. And they have this license just if they go through a particular course, which has to be authorized by the Ministry of Health. And I'm teaching in this course. And these courses are massively are something like 20 different modules, and they go from ethics of research, how to perform euthanasia, from everything. And if you don't follow this course, you don't get the possibility to get into a research team. You don't get the possibility to get into a project approval thing, because you have to declare in the project documents, I follow that course and I receive that kind of thing. So what it means is that if you have a good enough law, they give you a sort of a background, a platform in which you can ameliorate things. You don't need to change the law. You need just to go, as I said before, to interpret the law in a more different way. For example, the example the professor found is great. Another example I can tell you, something that we change without the need to change the law. There is a particular procedure that I use in primate science, which is called the positive training, in which the animal learn to collaborate with procedure as not to be forced, captured, or forced to do things. You know? And this is not required by law at all. The law required that the welfare of the animals being, protect as much as possible, minimize sources of stress. Now, the committee is looking after primary research now, subtly, without changing any law, now require the proof that that lab does positive training. If that don't have this proof, the project goes into the problem. But no change of the law was required. It was just a change of things. It was the change of the attitude. It was a change of things that primate training, reinforced primate training, positive training was the best way to do it, to have better data, better trust with the animals, less stress for the people who have to capture the animal, less stress for the animal, of course. That has changed now, and we didn't need to change the law. It was just a change of attitude.
Marita, just one quick thought about lawyers. Do remember that PETA was the mover that moved the whole institution of the NIH because of the way that they were able to do an investigation and file a petition with the administrative agency. And as somebody who looked through a fair amount of their work, I thought they did Class A legal work and presentation of material and presentation of outcomes requested to the agency in a way that the agency could not ignore what PETA presented. It was not possible to ignore it. They did just an outstanding job. So lawyers could still help fraud agencies to at least comply with the law, if not better things. Thank you.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you, David. Yes, indeed. Okay.
I have one question if I can ask, and that is for Augusto. And it says, from your perspective of an animal researcher, how do you perceive the acceptance of new alternatives of non-animal science? Where is it at now, and how do you see it moving forward?
Okay. That's a huge question, and it's moving forward. It's not as fast as we would like to, but it's moving forward. It's very much moving forward in toxicology. In toxicology, the animal test is diminishing. Is moving forward in regulatory work because but in regulatory work, they are pre-test made more with non-animal methods, which means that at the end, you use less animals towards the end. The problem is basic research, because in Europe, the majority of animals are used for basic research. And in basic research, it's more complicated. It's more complicated because alternatives are more difficult, because in basic research, you very often need the entire system to look at. And it's very difficult to enucleate a particular part of the system you can reproduce in vitro or with organ on the chips of organoids. But it's moving forward, and more there are funds from the European Community funding research of alternatives. We have Angie, that's a very interesting question, because we have, this is the let's say the technical part of it. Then there is all the theoretical part of it going on, trying to understand what it means alternative, what it means non-animal methods. We have colleagues, yesterday I heard a colleague saying, I use non-animal methods because instead of using a mouse, I use a fish larvae. You say, what? This is not an animal methods. So there is a big confusion still, thinking that non-animal methods, so alternative to animal research, using animals which are not protected by law and then are not considered sentient. Okay? So you would have research and you would say, okay, the animal protected by law are cephalopods up, octopus are protected by law, considered sentient in European Union. Crabs are not, because they're not considered sentient, which to me is very strange from an evolutionary point of view. But that's what the law says, which is completely anti-biological, but that's what the law says. So the people would say, well, I use alternative to animal studies because I use a crab. I don't use an octopus. You see, that's the mismatch between law, between biology, between what is an animal, what is not an animal, and things like that. But there is a big discussion going on about alternative, trying to understand what we talked about, but the use alternatives moving forward. The data from 2020 reveal minus 7.5% of animal use compared to 2019. But we have to be careful, because 2020 was the COVID year. So it's more likely that a lot of the research was done because the labs were not working. So we're waiting for the data 2021, 2022 to understand if there is zero reduction of animal use. But that was a very appropriate question, Angie.
Thank you.
So Tagore has a question. Tagore Trajano.
So, good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, Professor Marita, Professor Favre. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. Professor Favre is the greatest professor that I had. I had the opportunity to study with him in Michigan State University. And I know and I knew that that opportunity gave me so so many skills to work and study and teach animal law in Brazil. So it's like it's a pleasure to see you, David, here and watch your speech. David, I would like to understand a little bit about the developing of animal laws in countries such as Brazil, Venezuela, Bolivia, and even the France, that start to improve the status of animals in their laws. They try to organize a kind of a census animal that's not a thing, but it's not a subject of law. How can I improve our legislation in that way to give some different kind of category of this kind of animals, but in the same time, I say that animals is not like a subject of law, but it's not a thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Tagore. I think that's at least another hour of discussion, and I think we're about to run out of time. I don't see a way, but talking about animals used in science in particular, I don't think that I see our legislation providing them with a new legal hat to wear in this area. Instead, the law needs to change without talking about the hat, but by recognizing them increasingly as having a mental capacity and respecting that mental capacity. So requirements of socialization, requirements of mental well-being exercises, making their life more realistically positive for them, I think is probably our best path forward in the near term.
They have to be recognized as sentient beings. That's what it is. I mean, the law on experiment in Europe state animals have to be considered as sentient beings. And sentient beings means to be able to prove pain, sufferance, and whatever. And in order to avoid that, you have to go towards their ecological and ethological needs within the situation of captivity, within a cage, because that's the situation where they are. We can't fool ourselves. There's no forest in the macaque lab. There's no trees. Well, in some in the future, perhaps, we hope so. But they have to be recognized as sentient beings.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, I think we have to close the session. If nobody more has question, I have only a very, very small question, and this is you talk about the legislation in the EU. One of the standards, and you talked about the standards for the legal standards for animal in research. For example, I would like to understand better what does it mean for a scientist unnecessary pain, and what does it mean, so which standard is unnecessary pain in research, and also what does it mean, so these minimums that if you think that it is possible, this is envisaged the substitution of animals by models, or by, for example, other types of methods for researching, not using animals. It does is envisaged in the so clinical research, or in your community.
Okay.
Or not.
Okay. It's for me, I suppose. Okay. Okay. The first, unnecessary pain. Unnecessary pains means that you have to describe very with details what kind of procedure you use on that particular subject in order to answer that particular question. For example, in the past, if you want to have, no, let's see if I can. Okay. For example, you have a session for an animal that has to do a test that goes for 20 minutes. Okay, 20 minutes. And this 20 minutes means the animals experience a certain level of pain or discomfort in that 20 minutes. Okay, now, are these 20 minutes really necessary in order to answer the question you ask? Can you ask the same question using the methods will last 10 minutes? Can you demonstrate that? Can you do that? So you have to demonstrate the procedure you use, which caused that particular level of discomfort in the animal, is the only way possible to get the answer to that particular question. If not, it's unnecessary pain. Of course, there is a group of experts that look at that, and they will say that. Again, for example, the primate training I said before is unnecessary pain to run after an animal, capture him in order to give him an injection, press it against the wall of the cage, when you can actually train the animal, which collaborate and give spontaneously the arm to have an injection, an anesthesia, whatever it is. So the pressing the animal has become an unnecessary pain. The other thing is that the law said that experimenting on an animal is forbidden by law unless it's not possible to fulfill the aim of the project without the use of the animal. So you have to demonstrate that there's no alternatives. And that's a weak link. That's a weak link. That's a weak link, because that's something that has to change in the system. Because when we revise the project, not everybody is an expert to believe in that, because the researcher will tell you, I have to do this because there's no alternative method. Okay, and you just have to believe this. That kind of trust Angie was saying. And sometimes it smells like it's a method. I call it methodological inertia. People don't want to change a model that has been very successful. They get money for it. They have a research community using mouse. Now, why all of a sudden I have to use organoids? I have to change everything. I've been doing mouse for all the time in my life, been successful, so there's no replacement. So that's a problem we have to discuss about it. How evaluator can actually have the feel that there is no replacement.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, if there are no more questions, what do you think? We have to close the clinic session today, and that is my turn to say very many thanks to both speakers, David Favre and Angie Vega, and our moderator. This is a really an extraordinary session, clinical session today. A highly interesting subject, dealt with difficulties that we all understand. So we had today a lot of guests, lot of attendees, and they are always welcome. Some of them have expressed in the chat how much they have enjoyed your presentation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we have to keep talking. We have to keep talking. We have to keep talking because, you know, I don't have any faintest idea what was going on in Latin American use, and some people are less experienced what happened in Europe. And we use animals. We all use animals. The animals are the same. Animals are the same all over the place. Although I also think that we create our own animals, but animals are all the same place around the globe. So we have to find a way to communicate, to work together, to improve the quality of life of all the animals until we need them for experimentation. So, Marita, we have to keep doing this.
Thank you. So the proposal of these clinical sessions is to join and to bring together senior researchers and young researchers. So to bring together the experiences of young talents and prove the talents. David, that you are an icon for all of us. We are the mentor of many of us, and some that are not today here. This is really a great honor that you bring your knowledge together with us. But you, Augusto, that you come from other type of community, the scientists, and we have not always the opportunity to hear and to make, to really talk about law that we sometimes think this is the remedy for everything, and that this is not. And when we hear, this is my impression, we hear and we pay attention of the objections and the thoughts coming from the scientists. It is really having the opportunity to touch the reality.
But yes, and the other thing is the scientific community has to understand that the law is there to help them to do their job better. Because we still have a lot of colleagues, a lot of researchers thinks the law just a pain. It's just that, why they bothering me? I have to do my job. What they have all these laws? And when we evaluate projects and they object to the fact that we give you cannot do this, you have to do it this way, and we say they get upset. They think they don't understand that the thing is that the law helps them to do their work better. It's not an impediment of the freedom to do research. We're still this idea, it's just there to help them to do a better job.
Thank you very much. That's really very encouraging for all of us. So something, would you like to add something, David or Angie? Tagore, thank you for coming, for joining us.
Nothing more today. I certainly hope we can continue to have more discussion. Yes.
Okay, thank you, David. Angie?
And yes, I just want to thank you and the whole team for giving us the space to talk about these topics. Thanks to Augusto for providing a different perspective that we don't often have. This has been really incredible to listen to your point of view. And you said that the law helps scientists to do better to do their job better. It is the same case the other way around. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Excellent. It's been excellent.
Excellent.
Okay.
So our gratitude also for the whole team, volunteers that help to bring together and to organize these clinical sessions. Josebinfa, Laure, also Joan Bruy, and also Boli from China, who is not today, but will be next month. Thank you also all attendees, Verónica, Vero, Juanjo Rebollo, Tere Baena. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye then.
Bye-bye then.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.